Welcome and thank you for attending the Black History Matters series presented by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum. My name is Victoria Basulto and I am a current senior at Colgate University, located in Hamilton, New York, and also an intern for the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum. I will be facilitating the series of 28 presentations that will be released throughout the month of February 2021 and that you can view on our YouTube channel or on our website. I will now lead you through some introductory statements. The National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum is located in Peterborough, New York, in the building that you can see on the screen where the inaugural meeting of the New York State Anti-Slavery Society was held in 1835. NAHOF's mission is as follows. The National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum honors anti-slavery abolitionists, their work to end slavery and the legacy of that struggle, and strives to complete the second and ongoing abolition, the moral conviction to end racism. NAHOF has worked in coordination with the Gerrit Smith Estate National Historic Landmark, which is also located in Peterborough, New York, to create the Black History Matters series. The following statement is the purpose of Black History Matters. NAHOF supports racial justice movements seeking to address racial inequality, given the resonance with NAHOF's mission to address the second and ongoing abolition to end racism. NAHOF believes a significant number of Americans do not understand the current racial justice protests due to their unfamiliarity with 4 centuries of Black American history because this history was either excluded or taught inadequately in schools. NAHOF knows that education is a powerful step towards ending racism, and that understanding the history of the enslavement and dehumanization of Black Americans provides critical context for the ongoing racial justice movements and the persistence of racism in America. Given NAHOF's commitment to strengthening knowledge of history as one route to confront racism, NAHOF will present Black History Matters, a series of crash courses covering some examples of neglected topics in Black American history throughout the month of February 2021. Thank you so much for joining me in this presentation today, where I will be speaking about how a medium like literature, specifically theater, can be useful for learning/teaching history. If you watch my presentation on the Great Migration, I did something similar by utilizing art by Jacob Lawrence, specifically a series that he called the Migration series, to illustrate key movements in history of the Great Migration. Here I will be doing something similar by highlighting how the play by Lorraine Hansberry, called A Raisin in the Sun, helps illuminate some aspects of housing inequality for Black people. I would suggest that you check out Dr. Hartshorn's presentation that was released on February 17th, as his presentation talks more about the nature of housing inequality holistically. My focus today will be mostly on race covenants. So a brief background on the play itself. Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun is a play about a Black family, the Youngers, who live in a small apartment in Chicago's Black Belt. The play was produced in 1959 and received critical acclaim as it was the first play written by a Black woman to be produced on Broadway, as well as with the first Black director, Mr. Richards. In 1960, A Raisin in the Sun was nominated for 4 Tony Awards, one of which was Best Play, written by Lorraine Hansberry, and produced by Philip Rose and David J. Cogan. The title, A Raisin in the Sun, is taken from Langston Hughes' poem, Harlem, which I will briefly read out loud because I think it's important to understand the meaning of the poem and how it relates to the story itself. The poem Harlem by Langston Hughes goes as follows. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? This is especially important when we discuss the concept of the American dream, since the American dream is closely tied to home ownership. But basically, this poem relates to the main story of the play because many of the characters have dreams whether that be social or socioeconomic, in terms of moving up the gender, moving away from gender restrictions or moving up the professional ladder, that they are unable to achieve because of barriers placed on them due to their race or because of their gender. And thus the idea of deferred dreams is very prominent in the story. So the story's main plot surrounds the arrival of a $10,000 insurance check to the family's matriarch, a character known simply as Mama, though her name is Lena. The check is arriving after the death of the family's patriarch, Walter Sr., and several characters and family members have different desires for what to do with that insurance check money. Specifically, Mama's son, someone known as Walter Younger, and he is the Walter Younger, the son of Walter Sr. So he wants to use the money to start his own liquor store business in order to improve his lot economically. He thinks that buying this liquor store and running it will help him come out of poverty. However, Mama decides to use the money as a down payment for a new house. This was because it had always been a dream of hers to own her own house, and she believed that it would help her family escape the crowded apartment that they had inhabited for so long, which was also located in the ghetto. The problem arises when the family discovers that the house Mama has put a down payment on is located in a place called Clybourne Park, which is known as the white neighborhood without any black families. The characters are aware of this problem and what it presents to them. There are allusions to the bombing of Black American homes located in white neighborhoods and other kinds of terrorism used by whites to ensure that Blacks stayed away from white neighborhoods throughout the play. There's the mention of a newspaper article which speaks about a Black family being bombed out of their house for moving into a white neighborhood. So this challenge of being unwelcome into their neighborhood, Clybourne Park, as well as being attacked, is very much in their minds. But the family decides that they will make the move regardless until they are visited by a man named Mr. Linder, who is a part of the Clybourne Park Improvement Association. He tells them that the neighborhood coalition believes that the Youngers' presence in Clybourne Park would destroy the community there. The current residents are all white, working class people who do not want anything that threatens the dream that they have had for their own community. Mr. Linder tells the Youngers that the association is prepared to offer them more money than they would be paying for the house in exchange for not moving into Clybourne Park. This presents a large problem for the family, and the climax ensues when the family finally decides that they will not succumb to the association's request and will instead brave it out and move to Clybourne Park regardless. Though we don't really see what happens with the Younger family once they arrive at their new home, we can assume that they will experience a lot of opposition and even terrorism. So it's not necessarily a happy ending because there are implications in their decision to make this movement. Now, before I go into explaining how race covenants played a role in the story and how they played a role in the larger context of segregation in American cities, I do want to speak about how Hansberry's own life is presented in this play. In the biography of Hansberry, she is quoted as saying, "We must come out of the ghettos of America because the ghettos are killing us, not only for our dreams, as Mama says, but our very bodies." She speaks out of experience when she says this. Her own family was involved in the attempt to integrate a white neighborhood and was met with violence from existing neighbors. Her father, Carl Hansberry, purchased a home in Southside Woodlawn neighborhood in 1937. When the family moved in, they were met by a white mob that tried to intimidate the Hansberrys into leaving their home. One of their new neighbors, Anna Lee, took the Hansberrys to court under the pretext that, quote, Blacks legally could not occupy any residence in any neighborhood covered by a race-restrictive covenant, end quote. The Neighborhoods Improvement Association would also play a big role in the lawsuit, just as the Improvement Association to which Mr. Linder belongs played a central role in A Raisin in the Sun. Although the Illinois courts sided with Anna Lee, Carl Hansberry and the local NAACP attorneys appealed the case to the Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of Carl Hansberry on a technicality. Therefore, Lorraine Hansberry's childhood experience would inspire her play's engagement with segregation struggles in Chicago as a penultimate symbol of Black oppression and resistance. The Hansberry v. Lee case highlighted the role that racially restrictive covenants and white home improvement associations played in keeping Black Americans out of white neighborhoods and in overcrowded sections of the city, like Chicago's Black Belt, as the Younger family is living in the play. Although the Supreme case did not end segregation, and by that I mean that the Hansberry v. Lee case did not end racially restrictive covenants because they only won out of a technicality and not because covenants were seen as illegal. The Hansberry's case did, however, set the stage for the Supreme Court decision in 1948 that would declare racially restrictive covenants unconstitutional. This court case is known as Shelley v. Kramer. So what exactly are these race-restrictive covenants, and how did they contribute to segregating American cities? The Civic Unity Committee, in a 1946 publication, defined racially restrictive covenants as, quote, agreements entered into by a group of property owners, subdivision developers, or real estate operators in a given neighborhood, binding them not to sell, lease, rent, or otherwise convey their property to a specified groups because of race, creed, or color for a definite period unless all agree to the transaction, end quote. This meant that when a race-restrictive covenant existed on a property deed, the owner was legally prohibited from selling to members of the specified minority group or the group listed in the covenant. If an owner violated the restriction by selling their property to someone that was on this restriction list, they could be sued by the neighborhood or by neighbors. The legality of these covenants made them super effective, removing the need for zoning ordinances and successfully segregated cities without placing any blame on municipal leaders or the government. This practice of race-restrictive covenant emerged in 1917 when the US Supreme Court deemed city segregation ordinances illegal. In the court case Buchanan v. Wiley, the court ruled that outright segregation ordinances violated the 14th Amendment. Furthermore, the 1926 ruling in Corrigan v. Buckley, almost a decade later, stated that while states are barred from creating race-based legislation, privatees and developers are not similarly affected by the 14th Amendment. This is because individuals were making the choice to segregate and not a government authority, which meant that they were that these individual choices to segregate was considered illegal. This allowed the government to condone segregation while washing its hands clean of the consequences. Thus, race-restrictive covenants played a key role in segregating American cities while at the same time allowing the government to not take any responsibility. And even today, when it comes to conversations about integrating American cities, the excuse always used is that the government did not cause this problem and therefore it's not the government's responsibility to fix it. So this was basically what happened to the Hansberry family and for the Younger family in A Raisin in the Sun. They were banned from moving to certain places, or at least hindered from moving into certain places by these race-restrictive covenants that were meant to keep Black families out of white neighborhoods. By the time covenants were banned in 1948 by the US Supreme Court, the damage had been done and American cities had been successfully segregated to the detriment of people like the fictional Younger family in the play. When the legal means to keep Black people out of the neighborhoods failed, whites often resorted to intimidation and violence to keep them out. They used organizations like improvement associations to ensure that they could use numbers against the arrival of Black families. In the play, we see how the Younger family's situation in the ghetto limits their mobility physically, and that their race does not allow them to move into neighborhoods like Clybourne Park. But also, their life in the ghetto inhibits their social, economic, and professional mobility as well. The damages of the segregation remains to this day. As you can see in this graphic demonstrating segregation in some of America's largest cities, this chart ranks cities from least segregated to most segregated using the white, non-white dissimilarity index for the largest counties in each city's metropolitan area. The medium-large metro area has a dissimilarity index of 45, meaning that about 45% of a city's population would have to move to balance the composition of individual neighborhoods to the region's overall demographics. About half of all large cities have the similarity indices between 38 and 54. And this kind of segregation is important because it leads to disparities in education, job opportunities, and access to healthcare facilities that tend to concentrate in areas of high income individuals. For example, the way that educational districts are funded in the United States has a lot to do with the neighborhood it is surrounded by, since people pay taxes to their local schools. This means that someone who is growing up in a highly segregated area where people are low income, they have less of an ability to have educational resources as well as other opportunities. So the play asks us to explore how this kind of segregation and immobility can harm Black Americans and their ability to realize their dreams. And it leads to the question Langston Hughes asks us to consider in his poem Harlem. What happens when we create circumstances in which dreams must be deferred? So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how this type of segregation has affected individuals living in these neighborhoods, I will provide a link, a list of references that you can explore in the video description of this YouTube video so that you can look more into it. It's definitely a very interesting topic and very topical because we are seeing that in the Black Lives Matter movement, there's also a whole conversation about access to housing and how fixing problems of segregation can help uplift Black communities that have been restricted by either legal or de facto laws that have kept them in places of low income. So you can check that out in the list of references that I will have linked there. I will also invite you to fill out a quick survey, also linked in the video description, that would allow you to give feedback about the specific topic. And this feedback will be very helpful in the formation of future presentations like this one. If you have any question about the series or the organization of NAHOF itself, you are more than, we invite you to email the organization or check out its website, and NAHOF's contact information is available on the screen. Once again, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on this educational journey. Please remember that we will be releasing a new presentation each day of this February. And we also have a couple of videos available that have already come out, and I highly recommend you check them out, especially to get a little bit more background on some of the topics that were discussed today, like a more holistic overview of housing inequality, as well as other presentations about something like I mentioned, the 14th Amendment, which we also have linked in the YouTube, the NAHOF YouTube channel. So thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope we see you at our future presentations. Thank you.